What is happening, you beautiful bastards? Welcome back to another week. This week, we have a fantastic guest. His name is Jack Chan. Not Jackie Chan, but Jack Chan.
But he is kicking cancer's ass.
Yeah, he is. Jack does all sorts of cancer research. And they've been figuring out ways to cure cancer that kind of took a back seat due to COVID.
It's actually some pretty fascinating stuff. He is a self-described cancer researcher, passionate science communicator. And he also has a podcast about what he calls shit science. He's actually a fun guy to talk to, and he's very well versed in, the up and coming technologies that are going to be used sometime in the future to tailor cancer treatments to individual people.
So let's check it out.
What is happening, you beautiful bastards?
Hey, Jack.
How's it going?
Good. Just talking about the new Batman movie.
Oh yeah, nice. The one with Robert Pattinson, yeah.
Yeah.
I said it's going to be junk.
I think it's going to be pretty good.
Dude, Christian
I'll ride the middle line.
Yeah, we were just looking at the cast list, and there's some huge names and some weird people playing weird characters.
Yeah. Who's playing the Penguin? It was
Colin Farrell.
Yeah. He looks great.
How could it be anyone other than Danny DeVito?
Actually, Jack, how old are you?
Me, I'm 26, going on 27 this year.
Oh, so have you seen the Batman movie with Danny DeVito?
No, I haven't.
It's all right. You don't have to. It's awful.
It was really bad. Yeah, he played the Penguin in the 90s.
Oh, yeah. Wow. So
was that the Val Kilmer one, or was that the George Clooney? That was George Clooney, wasn't it?
I don't remember, actually. I think it was George Clooney, but I wouldn't put money on it.
It doesn't really matter.
No, it doesn't. But anyway, we're here to talk to Jack.
And no Batman talk.
We got Batman talk. I mean, my limited Batman knowledge might not take us that far, but we can have a go.
All right, we'll start with a very important question. Jack, what do you think about Robert Pattinson as Batman?
Damn it.
Oh. Hey, I think there's a lot of potential there. I like the way he looks. I like that he can deflect bullets. That was pretty cool. But
I didn't even see that in the trailer. If we ever do get to a point where we do bring up something and you're like, I can't talk about that, we can edit it out of later, because I will probably be an idiot and try to get something out of you.
No stress.
Awesome. We were actually talking about how we were excited to be talking to you because Andy seems to think that cancer has taken a back seat and it's hiding in the shadows.
I think it's there. It's just with everything going on in the world right now, cancer's, you're not hearing about cancer like you normally do. So it's just it's sitting back there in the shadows like Batman.
Yeah, look, it's a good point. I'm from Australia, so the way we communicate our science, our healthcare might be a bit different to you guys in the US. But yeah, COVID has definitely taken the spotlight, as you can imagine. But look, it doesn't mean the work stops for cancer. We're still doing it.
No, not at all.
Yeah, we're still trying to get it out there. But I think, of course, you deal with the more pressing issues first. And the way it is, the pandemic obviously is more pressing. So that's why we hear about it.
For sure.
Yeah, but happy to share, some ideas, what's going on in the cancer space today, and just have a chat about maybe what I work on if you guys are curious about that.
Yeah, I was actually about to ask you what's the newest thing you're working on right now?
Yeah, so I work on cellular immunotherapies, very probably complicated term, but essentially it's a subsection of cancer immunotherapy. Again, another complicated term. But so cancer immunotherapy is using your own immune system to fight cancer, which we believe is very empowering. So I guess before I get into it, how much do you guys actually know about cancer?
I know that it's the accelerated growth of cells or uncontrolled growth of cells.
That's all I know. That's it.
Yeah.
Usually it's controlled with chemo, which is awful for you.
Yeah, I think that's a perfectly good definition for it. And yes, that's what cancer is. And we actually have what we call the 6 hallmarks of cancer. We used to 6 hallmarks of cancer. So way back in year 2000, they came up with like 6 characteristics that a cancer cell or cancerous tissue might have, including stuff like the fact that it continues to grow uncontrollably. There's no suppression of that growth. The fact that a cancer cell can grow in one spot, you might have a tumor, but then has that potential to metastasize, where it enters the bloodstream and travels to a different area, then sets up more tumors elsewhere, which is particularly scary. But back then, the immune system really wasn't in the picture. We as immunologists would be like, hey, you should look at this. We've got some pretty cool stuff here. The immune system, it actually might protect us from cancer. And people laughed at it, they scoffed at it. No one got funding to look at the immune system.
It normally does. Like if you're a healthy human being and cancer hasn't taken over, isn't your immune system like fighting it off like 5 million times a second or something?
Yeah, it is fighting it off. So I think like 10 years down the line, like 2010, 2011, they finally recognized that the immune system had this key role in protection. And now immunotherapy is probably arguably the hottest topic in cancer treatment, because there's just so much potential in that space. And then just this year, they released an addendum to that. And now there's 14 hallmarks of cancer. It's a trilogy. And and it's just getting ever more complicated. But the immune system has a lot of power because it protects us. In the same way it would protect you from an infectious disease, like removing infectious cells or infectious agents like viruses and bacteria. Your immune cells can also recognize cancerous cells and eliminate those in a very similar way. But as you can imagine, people still get cancer. So there's scenarios when, unfortunately, the immune system, maybe fails to do what it needs to do to protect the patient. But patients often still have the power to fight their cancer. They just need a bit more to get going. And so that's what we work on. How can we use that immune system, give it back its power to then eliminate its cancers? Yeah. Does that make sense? I'm
following you. So does it come in? Is it like a vaccine, or is it like a pill?
Yeah. So vaccines were definitely something we were initially looking at. Like, what if you took a bit of that cancer, turn it into a vaccine? So vaccines are often just parts of, say, an infectious agent.
Yeah, it's usually just a weakened one, right?
Yeah, so it could be weakened, it could be parts. Sometimes it could just be the infectious agent if you're talking like very remedial science.
Like smallpox.
Yeah, exactly. So we tried to do that. Well, not me, but scientists did. And unfortunately, cancer vaccines haven't performed as well as we'd like them to, particularly because this cancer is already in the body. Your immune system's already seen it. The fact that it's growing, it could be the fact that the immune system is tolerant to the cancer. So we had to look at other scenarios. And so we went and looked into the tumor itself. So the tumor obviously is full of tumor cells, maybe blood vessels that give a blood supply, but there's many other cells in there as well. And your immune cells actually are still inside that tumor. The issue is the fact that the tumor is growing means maybe your immune cells aren't working as well as they should be. And one particular immune cell is the T cell. And so this is probably my favorite cell. It's probably like the hero of the immune system for us. But what we found was inside the tumor, these T cells were showing these what we call receptors on the cell, and they're inhibitory receptors. And cancer cells can actually bind to those receptors and tell that immune cell, hey, stop working over time. Maybe shut down. And so there's all these cells in the tumor that just aren't working as well as they should be. And so there's these two very important scientists, Tasuku Honjo and James Allison. They won the Nobel Prize for Medicine and Physiology in 2018. They thought, what if we took that break off the T cell? Is there a way to block that interaction and give these T cells the ability to respond to the tumor again? And so that's what they did. So they actually took another immune component, which is the antibody. It's getting more complicated again. So these antibodies are made by more immune cells, but long story short, they can bind to certain things, they can block certain interactions, they can start certain interactions. But in the blocking sense, they blocked that suppression from those T cells to the tumor cells. And then those tumor cells were able to restart again and have their ability to take on the tumor and cause tumor regression. And this has been fantastic. So now you can actually go out, and if you are a patient, you can actually receive this therapy, and you can actually have somewhat of like a specialized therapy that can often have a good side effect profile. As you mentioned before, chemotherapy is not very great. Some people respond really well to immunotherapy. They have a really good side effect profile. Some people don't, but it gives you more options. And I think that's what patients really like, options.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, what kind of side effects are you looking at with immunotherapy to treat it?
Yeah. So a lot of them would be characteristics of inflammation. So, you're talking about the immune system. So you're talking about things like fevers, chills, headaches. In more extreme circumstances, you might have stuff like, vomiting and maybe heart rate issues, that sort of stuff. In order to deal with that, often it requires you to block certain components of the immune system. So it's a bit counterintuitive. But we can control those side effects generally quite well, as long as we're aware of them. So the best physicians will always be on top of those key markers that may cause these side effects. I'm not a clinician, a physician by any sense, so I'm not here to give any official clinical advice. But I believe we can manage those quite well.
So now, would it be changed up depending on the type of cancer you had?
Yeah, exactly. So depending on the way your immune profile looks and your tumor looks, you might want to use different immunotherapies. There's the case, right, where perhaps the T cells in your tumor just aren't very good from the get-go at all, and they might not they might not like or respond well to that blocking therapy that I mentioned before. And so there's other immune therapies that exist out there. And so the one I work on is actually taking some of those cells out from the patient and then modifying them to do different things before putting it back into the patient. So often when you're looking at the T cells in the tumor, while some might respond to that therapy, others might be what we call exhausted. So you can have, it's a very almost a human term, right? But you can have T cells that don't like to do certain things and they're just locked into that state. And so in that scenario, what you might want to do is actually take healthy T cells from a patient, those that aren't in the tumor, but those that are elsewhere doing what they normally do. Often they have a really good killing capacity. Like they have this really high potency to eliminate tumor cells, but each T cell itself is actually specific for a certain type of molecule. And so that's a particular issue, because you could have this really nice T cell that's really primed, ready to go, but it might just not be in the realms of recognizing cancer. So what do? We take those T cells and we make them recognize that cancer. And so
just fool them.
Yeah, just fool them, essentially. We send them to boot camp, some people say. So we can actually take blood from the patients and then isolate these healthy cells. And we modify them to express what we call a chimeric antigen receptor, or a CAR. And this creates what we call a CAR T cell. And so essentially, we just give them this ability to recognize a cancer cell directly, be able to kill a cancer cell directly, and give it back to the patient. So in that sense, you're not dealing with cells that might be exhausted in the tumor, that might not be as good. You're giving them a fresh batch, and hopefully they can make their way to that tumor and eliminate it. So this CAR T cell therapy is really good in sort of blood cancers. There's a patient called Emily Whitehead. She was quite young when she was diagnosed with leukemia. She did not respond to chemotherapy, and she kept on, her cancer kept coming back. But they gave her this new therapy, this CAR T cell therapy, and she's been cancer-free for more than 9 years now. Like it's that effective in that sense.
Is it basically, from the sound of it, is it always like you withdraw blood, change it in whatever way you need, and then you reintroduce it back into the body, or is it become through other cells as well?
So that's the main way we do it now. So we take it from the blood, modify it, put it back into the body.
Is that something that the body recognizes once it's in there and learns how to fight the cancer itself permanently, or is it only during the treatment?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So we believe, particularly in the blood cancer scenario, that these cells can hang around for the long term, and possibly develop that memory response you get, right? Like if you get an infection, you're not likely to get reinfected by that same virus or bacteria because you have immunity. So we believe it to be similar in that sense. However, in the solid tumor context, is a bit different. So whilst we've got a lot of acceleration in the blood cancer space, the solid tumor context is still not great for these CAR T cells, unfortunately.
Interesting.
And so that's what I'm working on. How do we make it better for that scenario? And so that there's many ways we go about that. And it's stuff like involving maybe CRISPR, maybe trying to put in different genes, trying to make these cells in certain ways that are different from different manufacturing protocols, just tweaking it ever so slightly until we get that sort of golden recipe that makes it the perfect treatment. So that's where all the research is going for the solid tumor space at the moment.
So maybe you might end up doing something like a biopsy or something at some point, because with the blood's just not getting to it and making the same sort of, dent in it.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, when you modify this, or you're modifying the T cells, is that as simple? Because I know a lot of times when it comes to T cells and stuff like that, it's how they latch onto things. Is that basically what you're modifying, is just the way that they're latching on?
So the way we modify it actually is funny. We use virus. So this is actually a virus we make in the lab. And it actually gets into our T cells, but we modify this virus such that it's not dangerous.
We do this a lot, don't we?
Yeah, we do it quite a bit. Yeah, like retrovirus, lentivirus. These are systems where they carry the genetic code for these different receptors that then get into our T cells.
This is when you scare the shit out of everyone with modifying DNA.
Exactly. So that's why we try to dance around the subject a little bit, because once people hear the word virus, they begin to freak out, particularly in such a sensitive time.
You think nowadays, though, people, like especially with COVID, people might have a better understanding with the fact that like every cold you've ever gotten, your DNA gets modified.
Yeah, you'd think so, but unfortunately, I think that the issue is the science just hasn't been communicated as well as we liked it to be.
So that's why we're here.
Yeah, exactly. That's why we're here. So look, these CAR T cell therapies, like I said, they're very good for blood cancers. They've actually been FDA approved for certain blood cancers. So I believe there's 5 different versions of it that you can get now, which is great. The issue is, particularly if you're looking towards European countries or Australia, a lot of these aren't on our subsidizing schemes. So I know in America is a bit different, but here you're looking at like anywhere between $350,000 to $2 million for.
Yeah, I was going to say over here it'll probably cost like I'll have to sell Jerry to prostitution. It's fine.
So when you guys have been working on the immune side of things, have you found, because you said that some people, their immune system just doesn't want to do the work for whatever reason. Have you found like an outside influence? Like say, I know there's been a lot of issues with microplastics and pollution affecting how our immune system as a species is working.
Yeah, so different individuals will be naturally different because they are individuals. So like you said, based on their exposure to pollution, based on their lifestyle, their genetics, they may or may not be primed to develop an immune therapy such as CAR T cells. And so one other big space that a lot of laboratories and companies are looking at is, can you make an off-the-shelf product? So instead of taking the blood from patients, could you just have the cells on the shelf ready to go, make them and give them to the patient without having to take any of their blood? And so this is very attractive because one, there's a lot of money to be made in this space, and secondly, it just increases the amount of patients you can treat. So there's many ways we go about it, and none have really entered late stage clinical trials as of yet. But there's a company to watch out for. They're called Prescient Therapeutics, actually based here in Australia. And they're working on this, what they call an OmniCAR system, where it has potential to be used as an off-the-shelf therapy. And so that's very exciting in that space.
Wouldn't you be able to use like the mRNA kind of device, especially with how like Pfizer's got that new pill one, where it's just a vessel for transferring the same thing from the sounds of it?
Yeah. That also is another thing a lot of early research is looking at as well. So the main modalities, I think, would be you give that patient mRNA, it makes its way to the T cell, and then it begins expressing that genetic code that the mRNA encodes to get what you want. So the term for that is called like in vivo transduction or transfection, complicated terminology, but in terms of that, the preclinical data shows that it can work, maybe just not to the efficiency that we'd like just yet. So there's still a lot of optimization.
What's it called when you donate blood and they filter it out and give you back your plasma or whatever. Yeah, I think it's your plasma.
Like,
You know,
is that apheresis, I think?
something like
Or-
that.
Yeah.
Which I always argued, if you're taking my blood, I don't want it back. Like, just keep that shit. Is that the same method that you guys do it, or is it literally come down to drawing a cord or whatever of blood and then changing it and then literally putting it back in with a IV?
Yeah, so you're not just giving modified blood back. You will actually isolate the cells out of the blood. And so you remove the stuff like the red blood cells and other cells that aren't as important for the therapy. And then you give that back to the patient as an actual cell product versus the whole pack. The good thing is you don't actually need that much blood to get a lot of cells out, which is great.
So what's like the turnaround on it?
What's the turnaround? Yeah, so I can't give you a specific number, unfortunately, but like,
Is it a long time or can it be short?
so it depends on what patients have access to. So in the most optimal scenario, you might be able to get patients their therapy in like a week or two, which is great. So I work at a comprehensive cancer center, which means that the manufacturing, the research, and the clinical all happens in one building. So patients, if they are receiving this therapy, get it very quickly. And unfortunately, other countries that don't have access to such facilities can wait, weeks to months.
I'm sure.
Which is very unfortunate. Like I believe, I think it was something like Japan, because they don't have that sort of access. Patients will give their blood, it gets shipped over to like maybe America to get processed, manufactured, get shipped back. Patients would wait like 3 months, and some of them unfortunately would pass before they get their treatment. So a lot of it's about how do you make this manufacturing easier? How can you make it more accessible? And again, how do you lower the cost, because it's so prohibitive right now, unfortunately.
Yeah, we have a huge problem with that in America.
Yeah, that's a topic for another day. So we can talk for hours about our health system. But when we're talking about a patient who's using this new therapy, what does that protocol look like for a patient? Is it like one and done, or you have to keep doing this for multiple rounds?
So it's a very good question. And again, I'm not a clinician, but from what I understand, it depends on how the patient will respond to that therapy. So, if they feel like they would benefit from another dose, they might give them another dose. It's a play-by-play, from what I understand, because the guidelines for treatment change so rapidly because this is such an emerging space. Back in the day, it'd be like a stem cell transplant. That's what you might do to treat. And then after so many rounds of conventional therapies, like your chemos, maybe your radiations, then CAR T cell might come at the very end as its last resort. And I think what we're beginning to see now is, day by day, CAR T cells is coming in earlier and earlier and earlier because we're realizing there's a lot of power there. So we're trying to figure out when is the best time. Is it necessarily better than conventional treatments at the moment? And when can we synergize that?
Now, is the process, I don't know how much you know about the process of medication in America. What's the process like for getting anything approved over there in Australia like?
Yeah, so it takes many years to go from idea to essentially a product.
I would say it's at least, I think, 10 in the States.
Yeah, it's about that, or even a bit longer here. So we go through phase 1 all the way up to phase 3, 4 clinical trials before things get approved. So yeah, often you might see an idea published in the news, but you probably won't hear about it that much until almost a decade later, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Now, I know that you said you were a little bit limited in the details that you can share, but having been doing this research for a while now, what do you think is like the most surprising thing you've seen in terms of what you're actually working on?
Yeah, look, the most surprising thing to me is how modular this therapy is, because from what I've learned and what I've worked with is, you might want to make a CAR T cell, but you might want to make it with, X, Y, and Z as well. So there is we like to say there's limitless potential. In reality, there probably isn't, but there's so many things you can do. And the way the space coalesces with emerging technologies is fantastic. So I briefly mentioned CRISPR before, but the way CRISPR is being used to modify these cells before you put them into the patient, means that there's so many effects you can target. It's like CRISPR as you guys might have heard, is like a system where you can knock out certain genes. In some scenarios, maybe put in certain genes. But what that means is, you might actually have a gene that is in a cell that could put the brakes back on the T cell. Maybe you don't want that. So you can knock out that gene and make sure these cells are primed to keep going. So it also means as well, you can replicate mutations. Certain patients just have mutations. They might not be too deleterious. They might not be too damaging, but they may confer some sort of benefit. So the fact that we can replicate that has been very interesting to me. I mean, it means that as well, if you begin to understand the patient a bit more, if you begin to understand what their genetics like, what their profile is like, even outside of the genetics, you can begin to specialize your therapy for that patient. So there's a lot of potential to get personalized therapies. We're probably still, a decade at least away from that, but there's so much potential there, which is very inspiring. And that's what I found particularly interesting.
Now we've talked about CRISPR before on the show. Like, what was his name?
I
Zahner?
can't remember his name. Yeah, Josiah Zahner. Yeah, Josiah
Zahner, who gave himself CRISPR, but I have no clue how the hell CRISPR actually works.
I can try and give you a bit of a rundown, but my understanding as well is super in depth. But the idea is, so we say CRISPR, but often we're using CRISPR-Cas9 as a system. So Cas9 is actually this protein that's derived from bacteria, and it's thought to be like the bacteria's own immune system. So the bacteria would have this protein. A virus might infect the bacteria. The viruses don't affect bacteria, which is crazy to me. And the virus genome, or the virus genetic component, can actually enter the bacteria, but this Cas9 can recognize the fact that genetic material is foreign and then cut it and stop its expression. So we've exploited this in this way. So we know that this Cas9 has the power to cut out certain genes. Is there a way we can target it to certain genes? And so we have created guides, like the little molecules that will actually move the Cas9 towards a certain gene that you want to knock out, and the Cas9 can cut. And then that's when you shut off a certain gene. What's good about mammals, particularly humans, is that we have DNA repair mechanisms. And this is another thing that stops us from getting cancer. But if there's DNA damage, like often DNA can break, right?
Yeah.
Our cells can be like, great, let's repair that. Let's let's fix up the code. If there's like enough remnants of the genetic code, it can repair it essentially to its original state. If there's not enough of it, it actually just tries to fill it out itself, which could be good or bad, right? But in terms of the CRISPR scene, what it means is if you can make the cut just right and then introduce this other template, which is like a gene template, and say, I want this gene to be repaired into the system, your cell repair mechanism might go, oh, okay, this is what I want to repair to, and then start synthesizing the DNA and inserting that gene into your cells. So where the efficiency of that isn't as high as knocking out. Knocking out is just cut, you're gone, you're good. But actually getting it in, people are trying to optimize those technologies there.
I definitely think we need to have like a service announcement of how to deal with DNA again. Because like most people that I know, their basis of DNA goes off of like Jurassic Park, and it just doesn't work very well.
Yeah. It's the same down here. I tried to tell my family about CRISPR and DNAs, and they're just asking me when are the dinosaurs going to come back, and I don't know, man.
I mean, I'm pumped for when the dinosaurs come back, but I think there's more to it than
that. So in your circle of cancer research, I don't know how broad your circle goes in the medical research community. Do you see like this immunotherapy that you're doing expanding to cover other issues outside of cancer?
Yeah, I do. So one big one is HIV. So typically the CAR T cell space, which used to be reserved for cancer, has now seen some success in HIV. So I'm not sure how much you guys know about HIV, but it's a chronic infection of your immune system. And then it leads to a depletion of certain immune cells. And what it means is your immune system doesn't work properly and can't respond to infections. And as a result, patients will succumb to those infections. So we can create a CAR T cell product that can recognize those infected cells and then kill those infected cells, limiting the propagation of that virus, which has been really great. There's other areas that people are looking for potentially for the CAR T cell space in, but unfortunately sort of requires this idea that you need a target cell. Like for tumors, it's very easy. It's the tumor, right? But certain diseases might not have a target cell where it might not be beneficial to actually eliminate a certain cell. But other immunotherapies do exist out there to treat other diseases, particularly with your antibodies. You know, you're either blocking, activating certain things. What's great about antibodies is you can attach a whole range of things to them. You know, you don't just have to block or activate. You could put a drug on it. You could put a radioisotope on it to give radiation in certain scenarios. So it means there's quite a lot of potential there. I know for like rheumatoid arthritis, for instance, another inflammatory disease, you can use these certain immunotherapies to help reduce that inflammation. It means that patients enjoy a better quality of life.
Yeah, I think that I actually have an immune issue like that. It's inflammatory. And from what I've read, it doesn't look like it's as easy to fix like a systemic problem like that as because I don't really know the mechanism, and it seems like the scientists don't know that much about it either. So it's hard for them to target and fix. Whereas cancer is, like you said, there's something there to attack. I don't even understand how the immune system says something in the body that's supposed to be there is all of a sudden a foreign enemy.
Yeah, look, again, I can't give hugely clinical advice here, but from my understanding of the way the immune system works, is, you know, as we grow up, you know, growing from, you know, fetal infantile stages from child to adult, you begin to develop your immune cell repertoire very early on. And this is when your body, it tells your immune cells, these are the things that are self, and, you know, you should not respond to these because you're going to see these a lot. And so often for patients with I guess autoimmunity, for instance, there's often issues in that training of the immune system.
Yeah, my experience with it, as someone whose immune system struggles to differentiate friend from foe, like I'll get sick with a cold, like the same thing that Andy here would get if he gave it to me. Our symptoms would be the same, but he'll be sick for like 4 days, and it'll take me 3 weeks to stop having symptoms. I don't entirely think that like the virus or the cold is still there, but my body is just like, hey, I'm not done killing things.
That's why we shouldn't be super clean. But in my body, that virus would last like a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it does sound like it's possibly your immune system that just, you know, keeps on putting out those molecules that cause inflammation. Because as you guys probably know, it's typically not the bacteria or the virus that is causing your symptoms. It's your immune system actually.
Yeah, it's your reaction to it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, because exactly like what you're talking about with your immune therapy is that you pull in the virus, and it's your body's reaction to the virus that makes you feel like shit.
Yeah. My body's kill mode just happens to take a really long time to shut off. I've only ever had to take medicine for it once. I don't remember what it was called, but it was some kind of immunosuppressant, and the timing was fantastic. It was the exact same time that COVID started.
Oh, great. Just what you want, yeah.
That's all sorted out now, but that particular branch of this particular science is of high interest to me, and it seems like it's not really getting anywhere because for one, they don't even know what causes it.
Hearing about it, or you're talking about your particular disease.
No, not me. I mean, just in autoimmune disorder in general, it seems like they don't even know what causes it. So really, how can you cure something you don't know where it comes from?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I guess a question I have for you is, where do you get your scientific information from?
His ass.
So it's from all over the place. I do read scientific journals that I don't even know what they're called, because I'll just look up the most recent research for immune disorders, and it'll bring me to scientific journals. Like I don't go to Google and like read Huffington Post on science. But it's not something that I follow close enough to be like, this is the source. I just know it's scientific papers, and a lot of it is like so dense with info. I don't really know what that means, but I'll like skim through it and figure out what's happening. Yeah, and I think that's a huge issue with science, right? It's so dense, and if you go into a journal, it's so overwhelming.
Reading it can be painful.
Yeah, it can be. And unfortunately, raw science is not good science communication. Unfortunately, if you're looking outside of scientific circles.
Yeah.
What I do actually is I go into Twitter. I don't know if you guys use Twitter for science at all, but it's a very good space for the academia, I guess, industry, you could call it that. And that's where you can find, key opinion leaders, based on different therapeutic areas. So if you know from your journals, articles, for instance, right, that you've read, often, those authors that wrote the paper or the managers or laboratory heads that, allow that to happen, they'll be on Twitter. And scientists love to engage on Twitter. They love to show off and post, hey, I just published here. You should check it out. But as well, these scientists, particularly the younger ones, love to help people understand, what's really going on in the paper. And so they'll do like what we call tweetorials, where they'll say, hey, we've just published this paper here in layman's terms in like a thread of like 6 or 7 tweets. This is what we discovered. This is where we can. And the benefit of Twitter is like, you can just look up someone and just slide into their DMs. You can ask them, hey, I just read your article, super interesting. And I have this understanding here, but what does it actually mean? Or is my understanding correct? And again, these young scientists, they love to engage. And so they'll try and make sure that you understand it, that you leave, I guess, empowered with that new knowledge. So I would suggest, Twitter is a really good space to engage with. And yeah.
I was going to say, speaking of young science, I was wondering how you yourself got into this field.
Yeah, look, that's another good question. So out of high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do, right? And I knew I was good at science, and my careers counselor was like, oh, you should do medicine, become a doctor. I was like, oh, maybe I should become a doctor. And in Australia, you got to do these aptitude tests, right? And they're like, yeah, you have to see this aptitude test. And I was like, oh, what is it? And then 2 weeks later, I sat it with like no study and I bombed it. I was just like, not for me. But I did well enough to get into a degree. And at the time, I was like, oh, hey, like, I've got this score. This is like a high scoring degree. Like, therefore, it must be a good degree. And so I get in, and little do I know that all the students that are in that degree are ones that didn't get into medicine. And so they're like, oh, we should all do med. And as I was in that class, like, I was trying to be like, I want to find my way. And instead I got swept up in that. I was like, I should do medicine. I majored in immunology. And I was like, I love the immune system. But then, I graduated, I got into medicine, and I was doing my first year. And I was like, I don't like this. Oh, crap. What have I committed myself to? So I took a step back, and I was like, all right, I like the immune system. I like teaching the immune system. Maybe I should spend up just a year, like, doing some research, learning nuts and bolts, and trying to develop that passion. And so I came back home, and I saw there was this facility called the Peter MacCallum Cancer Center in Australia, and they were doing a lot of CAR T-cell work, which I learned about in my undergraduate. And someone was like, yeah, you should just see if they could take you. So I emailed 4 different lab heads, all with the exact same email. I just changed their name and
Dear Bob.
Yeah, exactly. Dear X, I'm very interested in what you have to offer. Would you offer me an interview? And then little did I know they all worked in the same space, and they were like, this kid just gave us.
Emailed me out of the blue.
we all got the same email, so I got an email back, and they're like, let's have a meeting with all of us at the same time. I was like, oh shit.
I'm done now.
But they were super accommodating. They were like, what do you want to do? Take your pick. I was like, wow, this is like the golden opportunity to work in like I mentioned before, a comprehensive cancer center. And just to take my pick of like who I get to work under is not necessarily an opportunity that many are afforded.
No,
but I did that project, did that research. I loved it. I was like, man, this is super interesting. Like, I might not want to stay in academia my entire life, but I love the sense of discovering things. And I love the fact that because we're in such a good facility, there was a lot of engagement. I was like, I can start sharing, science with other people, at least get them interested. And so I stayed on to do the PhD. And that's what I'm doing now, my final year. And hopefully by the beginning of next year is to become Dr. Chan, just not that doctor.
When you went into the medical field, what were you actually doing?
Yeah, so look, it's just the first year. So It wasn't, super clinical, but it was a lot of lectures again. And maybe I was burnt out on doing 3 years of lectures and now doing like 20 lectures a week for like the greater part of the year. And I was like, ooh. So there was a lot of relearning that. The funny thing is, particularly in Australia, if you do medicine as a postgraduate, you don't actually need to do any science biomedical degree beforehand to get into medicine. So they reteach pretty much from the ground up, what is a cell, all the way up to like, this is like the muscles in the body, that kind of stuff. In addition to that, I would go to the clinic once or twice a week, engage with patients, do sort of like practical sort of scenarios, that sort of stuff. And I think, yeah, just something in that made me realize I was like, whilst having a very broad understanding of things is great, I think for me, it's more focused, I think, where I like to be.
Well, at least you figured out early that, to me, the medical field is one of the hard ones. If you try to get into it and you find out after that many years that you don't like it, you're kind of screwed. You know what I mean? Yeah. Don't
even get me started on like the debt you racked up. You rack up, man. It's scary.
Well, with such it's like a deep background that you got from your education, how do you react to the pseudoscience in the public domain that I'm sure you're exposed to on a regular basis? Is that something you just ignore?
It's not something that I ignore, but it's not necessarily something I engage with a lot on the online space, because that's a tire fire I don't want to get near sometimes. But look, it's frustrating, and you try your best to deal with it in terms of like saying, here is what's available. This is, unfortunately, now it's more of like, this is our stance, even though it used to be that if you found the facts, these are the facts, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, it's hard to just dissuade or to persuade others to just have a look and engage, because they're so fixated on their certain beliefs.
But that's why conversations like this are good, because even though we might not be on one side or another, hearing it without a bias makes a big difference.
Yeah, we might have a listener who has been relying heavily on essential oils, and they won't now after listening to this one.
Well, again, I think it comes back to the fact that so many of us had a very rudimentary idea of DNA and how it worked, and like that was the building block of your life, and don't change it up and all that stuff. And we're learning now that that's not necessarily true.
I guess the goalposts change, based on which scientists you're speaking to and their opinions on pseudoscience. I think for myself, like you guys mentioned, if you just influence one or two people, that's more than you'd get if you didn't. So
yeah,
you take what you get, and you hope that can propagate.
Yeah, that's true. I've actually in my personal life, talking to people that I actually know, when it comes to specifically like the COVID vaccines, I know a lot of people who said, there's no way I'm getting that. So I'd be like, well, why not? And they'll come up with the craziest things I've ever heard. And I'm like, why do you think that? And a lot of times they don't even have an answer.
But that's what, like, to me, there's, especially what we were talking about with going on Twitter. I mean, that's one way, but I think having podcasts with people who actually understand how these things work is good, because you're going to get, listen, Jerry and I have zero clue how this shit worked, an hour ago, right? Yeah. And now we still have zero clue how it works, but we have a better understanding than we did an hour ago.
We're at 0.1 now.
Exactly. And so people will slowly pick that up, where instead of getting all their media or information through media sources, which are unreliable.
I think, like I said, with Twitter, going to the horse's mouth is good. And of course, Twitter itself has many camps that exist out there. But yeah, I think the main message is scientists are out there. We want to engage. We love it when people engage with us. So if you're curious, just reach out, and we'll be more than happy just to send you a message. So some of us might even send you a whole slide deck, if you want it. So yeah, just come say hi.
So what are you working on going forward? Like, besides your typical day job where you're doing this research, do you have like your sights set on something big going forward when you finish school?
Yeah. So once I'm done, I would really love to move into the medical affairs space. And so, this is like a pharmaceutical company. So some people might see that as like the dark side, so to speak. But for me, because as you might gather, I really love science communication. And to me, this is the next level. And so the medical affairs space is really not about necessarily selling a certain asset or product, but it's making physicians and experts aware that a certain product might be good in a certain scenario. And it's a very symbiotic relationship. So individuals from the medical affairs space, such as like a medical science liaison, might go to a physician and say, hey, we've just got this study out. These are some pretty important things I think you should see. And then at the same time, the physician might say, oh, I'm actually using one of your assets right now, possibly. These are the insights I have based on that. And then you can take that back to the company and talk about where do you think this product is, or this drug or therapy is going to work the best. So it's a little less of selling things, and it seems a bit more scientific to me, which is great. I mean, I've worked in retail and sales before, and I'm done. I'm done selling.
Yeah, it's not for me either.
I actually don't mind selling stuff, but it has to be something that's, like it has to be good. Like I couldn't sell someone a Camry if they really wanted a Volkswagen. Like I can't convince you it's better. It's the same thing. No, what I was wondering is what are some misconceptions that you run into? And I don't even know if this is like in the public or even in your own field. Yeah,
look, there's different degrees of misconceptions. Like one of them is just thinking that maybe we're closer to a therapy than we really are. And so often I need to tell them, hey, this is very preclinical, this is very early stage, very promising. But best not to tell people that this will cure you or this will help, because we just don't have that data yet. It may well be, but be careful with the way you spread that data. Like the other day I was online and someone was talking about a supplement that involved like an acetylamine or something like that. A lot of good preclinical data, and I told them, hey, that's great, but don't tell people that it's going to stop COVID symptoms because we don't know that yet. Yeah. And then what I got was, do your research. I'm like, hey, like that's my job. I do my and then there were just thousands of articles out there. And then they said like a Google link to like their Google search. And I'm like, okay, so that's the misconception there, that things are in early stages, and also that everything on Google is reliable, which we all know.
Well, I think some of that comes down to the way both scientists and doctors speak doesn't translate to a normal brain. Because you guys might just refer to COVID-19, not even really saying that it's whatever you're talking about is a cure for it. But you could just mention it in some other way, abstract way, and all of a sudden we look and say, oh, it's a cure. Like it doesn't work that way, guys. And if you've ever talked to a doctor, we don't speak the same language.
I think as well, we're in a very different emotional state. Any sort of like gateway out of this, people will want, and I think that's very reasonable. And it's just, unfortunately, you can get too, I guess, obsessive.
Tunnel vision.
Yeah, exactly, tunnel vision, and unfortunately, that isn't as great. I guess another misconception I get is that even from some of my friends is like, the work you're doing is bullshit. And and I got friends that like, I want to trust what's coming out because you guys are hiding the cure to cancer, and I'm like, cool, like
no, we're actually making it.
Yeah,
I think that's a societal thing right now, though, where it's like they're not trusting any company. No matter what it is, and it doesn't matter what the company's doing or whatever they're working on. I just think it's business isn't trusted right now. I don't think government's trusted right now either, which that might be more deserving.
Well, I guess if that's a common misconception, we should clear the air. Are you guys hiding the cure for cancer?
No. I'd think about that. I had to think about that for a second. No. Always trying. Because like, I guess the thing I get as well is like the reason why you're hiding it is because if the cure gets that, you're out of a job. But I'm like, oh yeah, I don't think that's it. Pretty sure my skills translate. I hope my skills translate to another research area.
Not only that, why would they hide it? That means lots and lots of money.
Exactly. These are the same people that believe that the Australian government, has like a trading identifier and is actually trading in people and their identities with the UK government. It's
that sounds
bizarre.
There's a lot of that stuff out there.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
But yeah, I think I could see those common misconceptions being a problem. I mean, I have no idea what I'm talking about. And I hear those people say the same thing. I'm like, no, this doesn't make sense. I don't have the answer, but it definitely isn't that.
You wouldn't drink your own urine, Jerry?
No, I wouldn't. Actually, speaking of weird misconceptions, I don't even know if this is true, but I always heard if you're in the desert, you could survive drinking cactus water. And just last week, someone said, no, that's poisonous. Now I'm pretty sure I'll just die if I get stuck in the desert, because I'll be standing there questioning, staring at the cactus like, is this a good idea?
I'm pretty sure when you're like on your last leg, you're not going to give a shit. And then you might want the poison at that point.
Yeah, you might be right. We're in a weird time with misinformation where even stuff that I've known to be true for 30 years is now, well, it's a gamble. It's all a gamble now.
Hey, look, even in science, right? Like the science is always evolving. So even things that we believed, maybe a decade before or longer than that, whilst might not be untrue, has definitely changed a lot. Understanding has changed a lot.
Yeah.
And I think that's something as well that often a lot of people, there's a misconception in that they'll pull up an article from 1985.
Yeah.
And they'll be like, it's published. I'll be like, yeah, but this lab is also published the incremental developments on this, X, Y, and Z years later.
We've learned new things.
But yeah, cherry picking is definitely rife, I think, in certain subsets of the community. And I think that's something that it's going to be hard to teach against, because, once you find what you want to hear,
Yeah,
I thought we learned back in 2002 that WebMD was bad. Didn't we learn not to go to the internet for any sort of medical advice?
Yeah,
is that just me?
Idea.
yeah, look, we 100%, but yet, it's the easiest thing to do. I got a headache. Am I dying? WebMD, they'll tell you.
Yeah, but WebMD will tell you you're dying every damn time.
These are the 5 ways that you're probably going to die. It's not a headache. You're dying.
I think I might have gas. Nope, you're dying. It's cancer.
I don't think we'll ever have a break from people who are not educated in a space spewing bad information. But when we're talking about in your scientific community where you don't have to deal with that particular issue, what is the biggest roadblock that you guys have to run into that you wish was just not happening?
Funding, money.
That's the biggest thing. That's everybody's problem. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it'd be that. There's unfortunately, because there's so many good ideas out there, but the funding is sparse.
Well, especially with a new medicine, if that's what you want to call it. Because those 10 years, you're really the way it's been explained to me is because the approval takes so long, we don't come out with anything new. We just take what it's already been approved and we modify it a little bit to work for what we want it to do. Because if we wanted to create something new, it has to go through those 10 years and it's insanely expensive to do it. So whether it's pesticides or medicine or anything of the like, we're not really pushing the edge. We are, but we aren't.
And I think it's particularly hard for laboratories that only work in the academic research space to actually push out something that is new, because your investors that are going to get you through those clinical trials need such confidence, because you put in so much money to go from idea to drug. So you're more likely to often see big pharmaceutical companies making new things that might actually have different mechanisms, look more innovative, because they have that money. They can take that risk. So it's then the perceptions of big pharmaceutical companies is variable. So then the uptake of that unfortunately changes. I guess one other roadblock that I can see sometimes is the scientific community itself. They love gatekeeping, unfortunately.
Oh yeah.
You'd be looking at the high level in terms of people that are research laboratory heads, very dominated by white males. And so often you might have, new emerging investigators that have great ideas. They might even try to, not completely change the paradigm of something, but, just give something that might be a bit controversial because it's so new, but might accelerate the field. And, people peer review, you probably heard that term a lot. I've read a peer reviewed article, but it means your article is read by other experts in the field, but certain experts might not like that because it's in conflict with their current work. And so they'll say, no, don't publish this. But as a result, it actually slows down science on a lot because of all this gatekeeping. And it comes back, I think, to the funding, because, you know, if someone puts their funding at risk, they might not be able to guarantee their work a few years down the line. So it's very cutthroat.
I would say humans are also horribly against change.
Yeah. If you had to make a choice between either fixing those roadblocks or making a breakthrough on what you're working on, which one would you go with?
I think I'd go with fixing the roadblocks. If we're talking about impact, that's going to have a lot of flow-on effects. One, it means that, you know, making research accessible for people that are young that have ideas becomes more accessible. You get more ideas, more research, which is great, and then you get more therapies approved that flows on to the patients. With my work, like, you know, I want to believe my work is good, but I also believe I could train or equip somebody else to continue on my work, right? So I don't believe the research would ever stop in a particular space. So that's what I would try and do. Fix those roadblocks, make it more accessible, just get more science out there, you know. That's what we want to do.
More science is always good. Now, the real question, besides all this baloney we've been talking about, is how close are we to, like, I Am Legend?
Oh my goodness.
I don't know, man. Like, so some days I'm like, oh yeah, no, we're looking pretty good. Other days I'm like, I wake up and I'm like, God, like this could just be the day.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I think that's what has a lot of people scared about, like, shit, like taking the vaccine and stuff. So they're worried I Am Legend's going to happen. They're all going to be a bunch of brainless zombies walking around. Come on. With 5G.
Realistically, we're not at a stage where we can mind control anybody or make someone some sort of monster. I know. Biological warfare, it's such a lucrative space right now, right? But no, look, the things that get out there, they're approved. We go through the systems, the checks. At the end of the day, if you want to be very cynical about it, these large countries, the US, Australia, if you're talking about Europe and their union, they're all capitalist societies. You know, they want to be cynical about it. They're not going to put a product out there that's not going to make them money. If they're going to put a product out there that's malicious, there's no return on that. There's no return. So I don't think there's anything to be worried about in the sci-fi space or anything like that just yet.
Clearly let me down, man.
Chris, you just reminded me of another question that actually comes up here often, and he's the perfect guy to talk to about this. We quiz a lot of people on whether or not they would take human equivalent or better cybernetic enhancements, like if you could get bionic arms. How close are we in immunotherapy to convincing my body that my bionic arm is my bionic arm and it doesn't have to fight it off all the time?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't work in bionics, but I think we're at a pretty good
stage. Get on that shit.
From what I can see from people who work across the road, like they're working on materials, right, that are like, you know, hopefully not as we call them immunogenic, that doesn't alert the immune system a lot. So I think we're definitely getting there. I think transplants and graftments, huge space, like an amazing emerging space. So I think we're actually getting a lot closer than we are. I'm
curious to when it's really a societal thing to me. It's when people will willingly give up a perfectly good limb for a new one.
Well, first, once they solve that issue, I'll give up my legs. I'll take some new ones.
Just wait for once Apple's on it, right? Then you'd be needing to.
Yeah, exactly. Once Apple figures it out, we'll be all fine.
To be honest, though, I think it'd be a terrible idea because you know they're going to make it a subscription plan. And if you miss a payment, your legs don't work anymore.
Yeah, look, once I have an Apple arm, man, I'm not leaving that Apple ecosystem. It'd be too hard.
They'd have a special dongle. It would be bad.
we're brave because we removed the thumb, right? That's what they say.
Well, now that the important questions have been asked, I think that's a great place to wrap it up. So, Jack, it's been very informative, actually. I learned a lot more than I thought I was going to. I didn't think I'd grasp as much as I did.
Oh, thanks. It means I'm doing my job good.
We're dumb monkeys, so that's pretty good.
Do you do like social media that you want people to follow? I'm not sure if you're just trying to get the information out there or you have a podcast or what.
Yeah. So you can find me on Twitter on my personal account, which is @Jack_Chan 15. I also run a podcast called the Peer Review Club. We just talk shit science and funny science, and we just try to make those accessible. And so it's me and my co-hosts Vicky and Bonnie, and we just have a gas what we think is a funny, interesting paper. So you can find Peer Review Club on all places where you download podcasts. We also have a Twitter and Instagram as well, which is also at Peer Review Club. If you want to check us out there.
Awesome.
Go check it out, people. All right, Grizz, I feel like we are now as educated as we can possibly be, considering our limited intellect.
Yeah, of course.
Really, though, that was some pretty wild shit. And, you know, I don't really know anything about cancer research, but the stuff that he's talking to us about is just, it's pretty incredible what they're working on.
Dude, I think it's pretty cool. I mean, it's only certain cancers. It's not all of them, unfortunately. But still, like, for people who are, usually when you hear any dimension of cancer, that's kind of a freaky thing for people. And if they have means to take care of it, that's a lot of hope that a lot of people don't have. Yeah.
And as you guys probably know at home, almost everybody, maybe even everybody, at least knows someone who's had cancer.
Yeah, I don't think there's a person everywhere who hasn't been touched by it.
Yeah. So to know that, there's people like Jack who actually give a shit about it, working on it, it's looking pretty good.
Thank you again for listening to Beautiful Bastards. New episodes every Monday. Remember to like and subscribe. I want to die a natural death at the age of 102, just like the city of Detroit.
That's fucked up.